Hey everybody, it is Monday and it is time for art history. And boy, do we have an interesting artist for today. I just have to say that if I start getting hooked on anime now, it's your everyone's fault, your guys' fault. Because this is another suggestion. I asked for a suggestion for an artist for art history, and one of our students said, "What about an anime artist?" And I thought, man, do I know next to nothing about anime. So I have learned a whole lot about this one anime artist, and I am just in love with the movies that this artist has made. And there, I've seen. It's been a good excuse to have to watch a movie for research, which is really fun. And I am just enamored by his work. So thank you. And also, if I get hooked on this, it's your fault. But one of the things I love about teaching is that I get to learn so much. To teach you guys about something, I have to learn about it first, and that's one of my favorite things about teaching is I'm always learning new things. So thank you for that. And let's get started with today's artist. I'm gonna show you guys a couple clips too, not many, because this could stretch on for a long time, and I don't want to take up your whole day. So let's start off with Hayao Miyazaki. Hayao Miyazaki is probably one of the best known anime directors, artists, and full on creators of some of the most incredible moving movies to come out of Japan in the history of Japanese art and filmmaking. And that's a lot to say because Japan has come out with centuries of amazing art. But Hayao, if you notice, he was born in 1941 in Japan. And 1941 was a tumultuous year, to say the least. In 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and America entered the war. And one of the things that happened was kind of the United States and Britain bombed. And I'm not talking about the atomic bomb. This is before the atomic bomb. The United States and Britain bombed from the air with what they call fire bombs, which are incendiary bombs. They bombed Tokyo and other major Japanese cities in the lead up to the atomic bomb. And basically, most of the cities were made out of paper and for real paper windows and wood, and were basically like tinder boxes. And so Japanese cities were on fire in burning, thousands of people dying in these cities. And this is even before the two atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as we know, as some of you know about. Hayao grew up surrounded by devastation, surrounded by destruction, surrounded by the chaos and horribleness of war, and also the terribleness that his government had led his country into. The emperor and others and the fascism had led Japan into this war and killed so many people. So Hayao was one of the sons of a airplane designer and a maker, airplane maker. And when the bombing started to hit Tokyo, Hayao's father moved the family out of Tokyo and moved them to a city closer to the airplane factory and also away from the bombing. And I'll explain more about that later. Hayao had a very interesting childhood. He grew up with a very astute, scholarly, intelligent father and a very loving mother who's also dealing with her own trauma, which we'll talk about in a bit. So, like I said, Hayao's father was designed airplane parts, manufactured airplane parts for warplanes during World War II, and so in a lot of Hayao's films, you're gonna see he had an early obsession with flight, airplanes, things like that. So you're gonna see a lot of that in his films. Hayao's mother, on the other hand, one of the biggest influences was she was very loving and compassionate, but she also suffered her own trauma. She was very sick throughout Hayao's life. She had spinal tuberculosis, and so she was in the hospital for a long period of time. And in Hayao's later films, you're going to see One of the characters in his films is a mother who's very sick, and her child has to kind of try to help the mother. So again, both parents had an influence on Hayao's future filmmaking and artistic development. One of the other experiences in childhood that really affected Hayao was when the parents were fleeing Tokyo when it was being bombed with the fire bombs. He remembers that they were packed into a jeep and that they were leaving the city, and they ran into a family, and there's a young girl and the mother, and they're on the side of the road, and there wasn't enough room in the jeep to take this family with them. The family was asking to go with Hayao's family, but there wasn't enough room, and so they basically had to leave this little girl and her family on the side of the road, and that has kind of haunted Hayao his whole life. And he's always thought, what has happened to that little girl? Whatever happened to her? And you'll see more of that later. So another huge influence is when his family moved out of Tokyo. The new home that Hayao lived in as a child was in a forest. And so this kind of opened up the beauty of the natural world and the mystery and splendor of a deep forest. And if you've ever been in the forest that is pretty thick with trees and vegetation and the sound of birds, it's a magical place. And that forever influenced Hayao and kind of sparked his imagination for the mystery and fragility even of the forest. So when Hayao was a young boy, he saw his first animated film, and he it's, I think, called The Legend of the White Snake. I should probably know this, but I don't have the title in front of me. But he watched this as a young boy and was fascinated how pictures and a whole story could come to life through drawings. But he did not go to school to become an artist. He went to school to become an engineer, but after graduating, he decided throughout his schooling, he was reading a lot of manga. And he was really into this manga, Astro Boy, which I even knew about when I was a kid. So this is probably about the 1960s. And he decided, instead of becoming like an engineer, he wanted to become a mangaka, which is basically a manga artist, and work in one of these large studios producing manga. And so that is kind of one of his first goals, is he wanted to be a storyteller and he wanted to be a manga artist. When Hayao was a young man, he got his first animation job at a company in Japan called Toei Animation, and he was able to contribute drawings and art to his first film. Again, he didn't make the film totally, but he was able to contribute. It's called Puss in Boots, and it was a chance for him to start exploring the world of hand-drawn animation, which would become a lifelong love that he would never abandon. In fact, Hayao has retired about, I don't know, 6 times. He's retired from animating, and then he's come back to work on yet another film. So it's one of those things that there's a common quote that as an artist, you can never really retire, because there's always going to be that drive and passion for creating. When Hayao was working at Toei Animation, he realized he was working a lot as like a background artist, doing scenery and painting the backgrounds, but he realized that he could make airplanes really well, and cars, he could draw them really well. But one of his biggest problems was drawing humans. So he decided that while he was working there, he was going to improve his skills. And so he would go out in the park and sit and watch children run around. He'd watch adults, eating lunch. He was just a people watcher. And through watching and sketching people, he soon developed his own style of drawing the human figure, which would transform him from just a artist who would draw scenery and background to a true anime artist who would control the entire process of creation. Another huge film that Hayao worked on, which was kind of the first film that catapulted him into the huge taking over a film, was Horus, Prince of the Sun. I have not seen this film, but it was one of the first films that kind of got Hayao some notoriety. The next film that he worked on that was really directed, it was the first film he actually directed. I may be wrong, but that's what I read. First film he directed was Lupin III, the Castle of Cagliostro. And this was a film that put Hayao on the map. Why? Well, because it was the art style was incredibly rich. I mean, look at the scene, and the action and the way of animating and storytelling was unique and dynamic and fun. And I'm just going to give you an example. A lot of directors say that this movie had the greatest car chase of any movie in history. I just want to show you a bit. You're going to see when I show you this clip and say, "Wow, this is something special here." The next film that really again establish a unique vision of Hayao, and as compared to a lot of the other Japanese studios, was now Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Again, I have not seen this full film yet, but there are some incredible scenes, and it was one of the first movies that featured something that would become a standard feature in Miyazaki's film, which was a strong and independent and brave leading female instead of a leading male, and did very well. And it did so well that Miyazaki and some other artists were able to form their own studio. And this is the birth of Studio Ghibli, which I maybe pronounce another way, but I'll just say Ghibli for this. Ghibli is actually the name of an Italian World War One and Two fighter plane. And again, it just shows you another example of Miyazaki's love of flight and his obsession with airplanes. And so he named his studio after that. So let's talk about studio for a second. This is where the magic of these films takes place. Miyazaki's studio, Studio Ghibli, is one of the only animation studios that where everything is done in house. And what I mean there is everything is done in the same building. A lot of animation studios, they'll have, the drawing done in one building, and then the drawings are sent to another place where they're colored, and then that's sent to another place where they're animated, and then that's sent to another place where the editing takes place, and then the sound, and then the so forth. But in Studio Ghibli, everything takes place in the same building. And in that way, Miyazaki creates this, almost like one organism where everyone's working together to make this film, with him as the brain and the head and the soul of the film. But it is there was a documentary a couple of years ago that came out about the making of one of the films. I have yet to get my hands on seeing that. I definitely want to see that. It's called the Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, and it kind of follows this 10-year journey of making one of Miyazaki's films. But it is just a great place, and some other studios have started to take direction. I think Pixar started to, instead of making everyone in a different place, everyone is working in the same environment. I think the Weta Workshop and some of the films that did Lord of the Rings do the same thing. So Miyazaki kind of started a trend here, and he has his hand and his ideas in every aspect of the film. Every aspect of the film, let me see if I have an example of that. Yeah. So from the initial idea to the storyboarding, to the animation, to the music choices, to everything, Miyazaki is the one behind the films. They come from his imagination and from his hand. Okay? This is what we call an auteur film. An auteur is another way to say author. Okay? An auteur film is a film that comes from the mind and the soul and the vision of a single person, a single artist. Yes, other artists work together to make the film, but the actual stamp, you can tell a Miyazaki film when you see one, because he's done everything. He's storyboarded, he's drawn, he's created the characters. Everything is done by him. This is like, let's compare that to Disney. Now in Disney, you're going to have director, producer, writers. Everything is split up. Okay. So it's not usually one person's vision. Yes, Walt Disney created the Disney company, but Walt Disney didn't himself sit around and draw everything out in the films. He didn't do any of that stuff. So Disney is it's a big difference. Miyazaki's and Studio Ghibli, it's comes from this one man basically, and his vision is realized versus Disney, which is more like a corporation and some of that. So that's one of the reasons that makes Miyazaki's film so special is, and Studio Ghibli's film so special, is that they usually come from the mind of and the creative mind of Miyazaki. Okay, now we're just gonna go. I could make these very long, but I'm gonna try to tighten them up. I'm gonna go over really quickly, six common themes that one will see in Miyazaki's film. In full disclosure, I have only really seen two of his films, but I'm about to see more because I love them so much. So there's kind of six themes that run throughout almost every one of his films. And one is feminism, two, pacifism, which I'll explain all these, three, flight, as you've already seen, four, childhood, five, a complicated or nuanced villain or bad or evil person, and I'll explain what that means, and then six, water and the environment as a whole. So let's talk about feminism. So Miyazaki is known in the industry as a feminist. And one of the things that, why is he known as a feminist? And what is feminism? So feminism is the idea that women and men should be treated equally, which if you don't agree with that, I don't know why, because that's ridiculous. So feminism is that men and women should be treated equally. It's not that women should be better than men or men. It's women and men should be treated equally. And I think everyone should be a feminist, in my opinion, because everyone should probably agree that men and women should be treated equally. Okay, so now, in his films, first of all, let's talk about the studio. Studio Ghibli, when they created the studio, Miyazaki wanted to make sure that he had this about the same amount of female animators and creators as he did male. He wanted a balanced studio. He wanted writers. He wanted the female influence in the studio. And also, a lot of his main characters are strong, complex female characters, either children or an adult woman. And when he was asked about this, he said, well, some of that comes from his early experience where they left that little girl. A lot of bells. They left that little girl on the side of the road when he was a kid, and he always wondered. He always just thought about that little girl and thought about what her life was hopefully like. Hopefully, it was good, and it's his chance to kind of imagine the life of a little girl growing up. Also, he has a lot of friends that have daughters that kind of inspire some of the films, and I'll talk about that later on. So again, feminism is one of the keys. Before Miyazaki, there weren't a lot of leading female characters, and so he kind of championed this, especially in Japanese films, where girls and women are the leads. Pacifism. Miyazaki's early world was destroyed by war. I mean, his country was destroyed by war. Some people he loved were destroyed by war. And in most of the movies that he has created, war is a destructive, terrible thing. It's something that ruins things. It's something that should be avoided at all costs. And so, yes, there is fighting, there is action in his films, but the overall theme is that if you can avoid it, you should not be creating violence. So his films are very strongly pacifist and anti-fascist because his government was, along with the government of Hitler and the government of Italy, was a fascist regime, which is where like a one leader basically tries to impose ultimate control over everyone through the government. So he was against that as well. Flight. This is something I've already talked about. Flight has always been an inspiration for Miyazaki from his earliest days, watching his dad design airplane parts, to the idea of flight as freedom, as power, as just something. And especially when you're dealing with animation, flying is something. One of the beauties of animation is it can do things that it would take a lot of special effects to do this in a film. So animation can do it almost effortlessly. It can create whole worlds of flight, and so anything can fly. So flight has been a huge vehicle in his movies. Childhood. Okay, now childhood. If you watch animation, a lot of times it focuses. There's a lot of the main characters are children. One of the reasons Miyazaki uses children a lot is because there's children see the world differently than adults. They do, and a lot of times it's sad when adults grow up and they lose that sense of the world. There's that sense of wonder, the sense of mystery, the sense of adventure, and that's why one of the reasons he loves having children in his films, uh, just to explore that whole the wonderful world of childhood, where everything is touched with a bit of magic, and that kind of is a great inspiration from. Another aspect of childhood that has inspired him is one of my favorite Miyazaki films is Spirited Away, and he said that film was inspired by his friend's 10-year-old daughter. So one day, his friend brought his 10-year-old daughter over to Miyazaki's home because he was meeting with the girl's father, and he noticed how sullen and apathetic and he said lazy this girl was, and how uninterested in the world around her. Her head was buried in her phone, and she just basically couldn't have cared less about the beauty around her, and she was whiny, he said. And he thought, now this is a problem. This is a problem. I don't like this. This girl needs to put the phone down and go out and explore the world around her, because she has so much strength and courage and creativity within her that she's not tapping into. So in the film Spirited Away, it begins with the main character as this kind of whiny kid who's just mad at her parents and upset with everything around her, and everything's against her, and she's scared of everything, and she turns into, throughout the movie, into this very, very strong and very brave and imaginative character. So there's kind of a transformation there. Now let's talk about villains. In Miyazaki, the idea of creating a film where there's a really evil thing and the good guys or the good gals are fighting the evil thing is very uninteresting and too simple for Miyazaki. He doesn't like that sort of thing. So his villains are usually not totally black and white. They're not. It's not like evil versus good. It's more nuanced. And nuance means there's more aspects to it. They're more complicated. For example, in Spirited Away, there's two. You might call them villains. They are these twin witch sisters. But as the film goes on, you see there's motivation. There's a reason that these two witches are battling each other and battling the world and scared and angry. One of the witches, she's really worried about her child getting sick, and she's worried about the outside world infecting her child and hurting her child. The other witch, she had something stolen from her that meant a lot to her, and so she's very upset with that. So Miyazaki has these quote unquote villains that are more complicated. They're motivated by things that are hurting them. And when those things are addressed, there's a change in the villain. Kind of like in Moana. If you've seen Moana, the goddess of the volcano, she seems like a horrible, scary thing, but she's upset because something was stolen from her. So, and another funny reason why Miyazaki doesn't have classical villains is he doesn't like to draw evil, yucky things, he says. He just thinks they're just not fun to draw. He'd rather draw more fun, interesting, and lighthearted characters. So the last theme that in a lot of Miyazaki's films is water and the environment. Miyazaki really, like a lot of other artists, is very concerned about the destruction of the environment and what humans have done to forests, to rivers and streams, especially rivers and streams. In the film Spirited Away, there is this big stink spirit. It's this big, lumbering, dripping, gooey, disgusting, smelly spirit that everyone wants to get away from. This, kind of lumbering thing. And it turns out, with the help of the main character, it turns out that the spirit is really not all that it seems. It actually, the main character finds that there's something sticking out of this spirit's side, and when they pull on it, all this trash comes out. There's a bicycle that comes out. There's, all this human pollution comes pouring out of the character. And after that happens, the character emerges as its true self, which is this beautiful river spirit. So it starts off as this, sad blob of stink. And it turns out that once it's cleaned, it is this beautiful river spirit. And this comes from another life experience from Miyazaki. When Miyazaki was younger, there was a river near his home that was choked with pollution, and he and his friends decided they were going to help clean it out. So, and they found a full-on bicycle inside the river, and once they cleaned out the river, fish returned to the river, and the river was healthy again. So again, this was a way for Miyazaki to express his concerns about the environment through film. So that is what we're going to end with. And so I hope you enjoyed this. I am going to watch more of his films. I hope you do. I'd recommend Spirited Away for sure. Howl's Moving Castle for sure as well. And I hope you enjoyed this, and make sure you answer the questions. Have a great day. And let's watch